On June 4, 1989, Chinese soldiers opened fire on protesters at Beijing's Tiananmen Square. This massacre was a violent retaliation to student-led protests that had started on April 15th of the same year. Many Chinese students and adult activists believed that communist leaders were corrupted and that the current leadership should resign.
Communism was first introduced to China with the formation of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, in 1929. This party was founded by the communist dictator Mao Zedong. The party came into power during the Chinese Revolution, where the government of China fell to communism. On October 1st, 1949, when communism officially took over China, Mao Zedong declared the creation of the People's Republic of China, which was a fully communist version of the original Chinese government. For more than 20 years after the Chinese Revolution of 1949, there were few contacts, limited trade, and limited diplomatic ties between other countries. When China fell to communism, Taiwan split apart and became an independent country known as the Republic of China. Mao threatened to take over this new country, but Taiwan was supported by the United States and allies, who were severely anti-communist. Many events built up tensions and motivated others to protest at Tiananmen Square. While economy and politics were the two major topics, the death of Hu Yibong, a Chinese political leader, sprung protests into action. He sought reform in the government as well as in the economy. Hu Yibong was against Mao's ideology and ideas that wanted power through insurgency and through insurgent doctrine. He wanted a more flexible form of government that would increase the rights of citizens, though in 1987, weeks after students protested for more Western-like freedoms, his opposition, which was party elders and military officials, removed him from power. They removed him on terms due to his leniency and because he wanted a more free market style of economy. He died later on April 15, 1989 from a heart attack, which sprung protests into action. Protests started on April 15th, when students and adult activists gathered together on Tiananmen Square to protest both leadership and to commemorate the death of Hu Yibong. The protests quickly shifted toward the topic of corruption and political issues at that time. As demonstrations continued, though, many leaders had divided opinions and different views on how to handle and eventually subside the situation. As numbers of protesters rose, the protests became even more of a challenge to the Communist Party. Another factor that added to the pressure was the impending visit of Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev, which meant Western media would be in the country. Chinese leadership later enacted martial law in Beijing on May 20th, as protests continued regardless. Why are the protesters still here? Why didn't many leave? These are two very similar questions asked with the protesters' motives and align with the eventual massacre. The Tiananmen Square protesters kept going because they had the most powerful weapon with them: hope. Hope that their country could change. Even with all the danger and the risks, they were committed to making their voices heard, not just as one, but as a group. They were not just standing up for themselves, but for generations to come. That hope for a better future for all is what kept them going through such tragedy, hardship, and pain. Finally, on the night of June 3rd, 1989, the Chinese government decided that they have had enough. The People's Liberation Army stormed Tiananmen Square with tanks and thousands of troops. The sudden and violent crackdown led to many deaths and even more injuries of the massive crowds as they were breached. The situation escalated to chaos when troops began firing live rounds, causing turmoil to erupt everywhere. People ran, hid, and tried to stay safe. But while others began to fight back and riot, chaos was erupting. Fire blazed and gunshots rang out, while both military and protesters tried to somehow end this ever-growing chaos. Though, in the midst of this chaos, a remarkable and iconic moment occurred. Someone known as Tank Man, an unidentified protester, stood his ground, facing a column of tanks as they advanced, in the Qing'an Avenue. Despite the tanks' attempts to move around him, he repeatedly blocked their path, displaying remarkable courage and defiance. At one point, he even climbed onto the lead tank, engaging in brief conversation, or more of a yelling at the crew. Onlookers pulled him away into eventual safety, although it's unknown what happened to him.
It was noontime today in the center of Beijing when a man walked to the middle of the Avenue of Eternal Peace, which as it happened was already occupied. He walked to the middle and stood there. The man was alone. The tank was not. It wasn't just a single tank he stopped. There were 18 tanks and armored carriers in this convoy, and while he talked to the crew and ignored the gunfire, he stopped all of them. One man alone, of course, can't stop an army. Except for a moment, that's exactly what happened here. For 3 minutes in the middle of the day, an army was stopped by a man who stood still.
The CCP had its enforcement, and with enough time, they took back control of the city square. Many fled, many were hurt, and many are now arrested. Immediately following this massacre, the government attempted to control information regarding it. They restricted media and confiscated films from foreign journalists who were trying to leave. Many of those involved were jailed, and some were even executed. In the government, though, Zhao Ziyang, who favored talking to protesters, was replaced by Jiang Zemin, the new general secretary. This was ingrained in the people that protests will not be tolerated from now on. Attention remained heightened around Tiananmen Square for years following, and even today. The Chinese government not only denied that a massacre had occurred, but it also imprisoned anyone with information or knowledge about it, practically silencing them. Present-day Beijing still continues to suppress the memory of the event, though every year on June 4th, people in China and around the world gather to honor or look back on the lives that were lost and the progress that was made, and those who were imprisoned during the protests as well, or who still are imprisoned to this day. The long-term effects include severe tension between the United States and China. China also increased surveillance and routinely imprisoned journalists and media personnel caught taking pictures or videos, though despite these efforts, video of the massacre were captured by reporters and were able to be brought out of China in time for the public to see. Even years after the Tiananmen Square massacre, many individuals remain imprisoned, with some still awaiting trial to this very day. The Chinese government failed in its fundamental responsibility to protect its citizens, and instead it resorted to brutal measures, murdering those who hoped for a better, more democratic future. The massacre also marked a significant violation of human rights, as citizens were attacked for peacefully protesting and censored for speaking out against this horrible regime. The Chinese government's actions during and after the protests continue to cast a long shadow over both its national and international reputation.
The suppression of information about these events, the ongoing imprisonment of those involved, and the relentless surveillance of the citizens underscore a broader issue of control. Efforts to memorialize these victims are still met with resistance, and the Chinese government's tight grip on media and communication conceal the truth. Despite these measures, the spirit of the movement lives on. Every year, on June 4th, people around the world and within China commemorate the Tiananmen Square protests, paying tribute to those who sacrificed their lives and freedom for the hope of a better future. The massacre also contributed to profound and lasting international political changes. Relations between China and democratic nations, particularly the United States, were strained as a result of the government's actions. The increased surveillance and censorship that followed created an environment of fear and intimidation, making an environment with little self-representation. Footage of the protests and the ensuing massacre, captured secretly by courageous journalists, continues to serve as a powerful reminder of the resilience and bravery of those who stood up against tyranny. These images and stories have inspired countless others across the globe to champion the cause of human rights and democracy as a whole.
To summarize, on June 4th, 1989, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, violently suppressed protests demanding political change and governmental reform, denying citizens the right to protest and political expression. This highlights a critical balance between government authority and citizens' rights. Governments have the responsibility to maintain order and to protect national security, but they also have to respect and uphold the citizens' fundamental rights of free speech and peaceful assembly. Conversely, though, citizens have the rights to express their views and demand changes, but they must do so within the boundaries of the law, ensuring their actions do not incite violence or chaos. The events of June 4th, 1989 serve as a reminder of the intertwine between rights and responsibilities and the dire consequences when people do not hold these core principles on both sides.